Hello Revolution students, and welcome back to another video on the Russian Revolution Area of Study 1. In this video I'm going to look at Lenin, the leader of the Bolsheviks. When we study Lenin, we have to look at two things in particular. We've got to focus on two things. Firstly, we've got to focus on how his ideas contributed to the October 1917 revolution, and then we need to focus on how his actions contributed to the October 1917 revolution. So with that in mind, let's get into it. So one of his key actions was that he was the leader of the Bolshevik Party, and the Bolshevik Party formed in 1903 when it split from the Mensheviks. So yeah, the Bolshevik Party, which meant the majority, and the Mensheviks, which meant the minority party, even though the Mensheviks pretty much always had more members, up to anyway the October Revolution or just before. Perhaps the most significant document that Lenin wrote early on, and which contained many of his fundamental ideas, is What is to be Done, which he wrote in 1902. So many of his ideas within What is to be Done were influenced by earlier Russian revolutionary writers, and particularly the Russian Jacobins. And the Russian Jacobins were, and you can see there, an extreme wing of the populist movement. Writers such as Nikolai Chernyavsky and Sergei Nikayev. Under their ideas, through their influence, Lenin advocated the creation of a highly organised party of dedicated and professional revolutionaries. And historians agree that this highly organised party, the fact that it was highly organised and well disciplined, was a key contributing factor to the success of the Bolsheviks in October 1917. One of his key ideas in the organisation of the party was a democratic centralism. So you can see there, democratic centralism meant that the party was led by a central committee of leaders, and this central committee, they debated what they were going to do. But once, and they voted as well, the leadership voted, but when that vote was made, then they had to stick to that vote, and the rank and file had to follow whatever the decisions were made by the central committee. It's also important to understand that Lenin played no part in the 1905 revolution, and he played no part in the February 1917 revolution, because at both times he wasn't even in the country. After the February 1917 revolution, he did rush back to Russia from Switzerland with the help of his German allies during World War I, and he eventually does get back into Russia, we know, by April 1917. So other key ideas. So while he was away in Switzerland, and he was still trying to influence the Bolshevik leaders within Russia itself, so he was writing letters trying to convince them to act in certain ways. These letters from afar, which were written during March 1917, some of their key ideas: he condemned Bolshevik cooperation with the provisional government, and he referred to this cooperation as accommodationism. Kamenev and Stalin were doing this. They were trying to work with the provisional government and the other revolutionary parties, and Lenin wasn't happy about this. And another key aspect of accommodationism was that he urged the war to be turned into a class war. So he believed that Russian soldiers should not be fighting German soldiers. He believed that Russian workers should be fighting Russian capitalist bosses, and that German workers should be fighting German capitalist bosses rather than each other. He also urged the Bolsheviks to infiltrate the army and convince the soldiers to rebel against the officers as the first step in overthrowing the provisional government. Another key document written by Lenin just after Letters from Afar, when he arrived back in St. Petersburg in April 1917, were the April Theses, the very famous April Theses. And it's in this document that he discusses or sets out pretty much his key ideas about how to first overthrow the provisional government, and then for the Bolsheviks to get into power, and also resolve the various issues that the Russian people were facing at that time during World War I. So in the April theses, he addressed the issues of the war, the famine, the land problem, and Soviet power. He wanted the provisional government to be overthrown, and he wanted all power to the Soviets. He wanted the St. Petersburg Soviet and the Moscow Soviet, all the Soviets, to rule the country, because he saw, he advocated, or he made out, that the Soviets were the most pure form of democracy. And he also understood that if the Bolsheviks could infiltrate the Soviets, then that would be the path for the Bolsheviks to then get into power themselves. Through controlling the Soviets, they could control the country. It was, you can see there, it was a crucial document which greatly increased the popular support for the Bolshevik Party, and their numbers did rise. And you'll see there on the screen, their numbers did rise dramatically from February 1917 up to October 1917. Another key theory of Lenin's was this theory of a telescoped revolution, in which the bourgeois stage of revolution could be bypassed straight to the socialist stage. So from a classic Marxist viewpoint, Russian society was not ready for a communist revolution because it had not reached that capitalist stage in history. It did not have enough workers. It was not a capitalist society as yet. And from a classic Marxist viewpoint, if it wasn't a capitalist society, then you couldn't skip that stage. You couldn't overthrow the bosses and then create a communist society. Lenin believed you could skip that stage and pretty much say, well, we didn't need to wait for a capitalism to arise in Russia. We could just jump over that and go straight to and create a communist society. And through this idea of telescope revolution, Lenin was able to justify the overthrow of the provisional government. Other Marxist revolutionary groups, such as the Mensheviks, stuck to the classic Marxist line, and that's why they didn't grab for power like the Bolsheviks did, because they believed, following Marx, that the capitalist stage in Russian society had not been reached. Another key action of Lenin was that he convinced the Bolshevik Party, the Central Committee of the Bolshevik Party, to stage an insurrection against the provisional government. And he convinced the Bolshevik Party Central Committee to do this on the 10th of October 1917. He was unable to convince them to set a date, but at least he made them agree to an insurrection. And this was key to the Bolsheviks being prepared then to overthrow the provisional government when Alexander Kerensky decided to try to shut down the Bolshevik newspapers on the 23rd of October 1917. And then the Bolsheviks decided it was time to try to begin the insurrection against the provisional government. Finally, his most significant act was to lead the Bolshevik insurrection and the revolution against the provisional government from the 24th to the 26th of October 1917. So there is a summary of Lenin's key ideas and actions and how they contributed to the October 1917 revolution. Let's now have a look at some historical interpretations. And I have got three here. The first one is from Orlando Fige, and he writes, Lenin's personality was the crucial issue. Bolshevism was defined by a personal pledge to him, and Menshevism by opposition to him. Richard Pipes writes, Lenin had a strong streak of cruelty. It is a demonstrable fact. He advocated terror on principle, issued decrees which condemned to death countless people innocent of any wrongdoing, and showed no remorse at the loss of life for which he was responsible. And finally, this last historical interpretation is from Trotsky. From the 25th of October, the man at the head of Russia was Lenin, the greatest figure in Russian political history. So there is three historical interpretations about Lenin. I hope you have found this video useful for your study of the Russian Revolution, area of study 1, and I shall see you next time. Goodbye.